Before we begin, I just wanted to say, if any of you remember last year me doing a whole thing about Mario sequels, proposing other games that could go into the timeline, as we do indeed unify all of that franchise into an actual continuity, well, these last few weeks I have been getting into The Legend of Zelda, and as a result, I have now added a 13,000 word addendum to the end of that previous Google Doc. Again, just not talking about it in the same way as I did Mario, but nevertheless giving these sort of details about how we could consider tying in absolutely everything, justifying certain Easter eggs here as how do they actually make sense in universe, and making everything slightly more cohesive, if only sometimes through the lens of the gaming multiverse that previous document set up. So if that's interesting to you, if you like Legend of Zelda, or if you want to check out the Mario document itself for all around 100,000 words that it is, then the link is as it was previously in the description below. But with that, hello and welcome to the Ragnarok Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and this is the channel where we talk about the lore of the books that I am writing. Where today, we're going to be talking about this. Not the first time I've brought a child's toy onto a video, we just checked a couple of weeks ago, and it's probably not going to be the last. But yes, we're going to talk about this, or more specifically, what this represents in my imagination. But before we get to it, we're going to have to set up some other things first. If you have been watching other videos on this channel, you may be familiar with me talking about the structure of the Alpha Realm within the reality of the Ragnarok Chronicles. If you have, apologies if this is repetitive, but if you haven't heard it before, or if you need it explaining again, basically the level of reality that we on Earth exist in fact is made up of a string of static bubble universes, each just minutely different to the ones next to it, such that as our soul energy, our beaureia energy, passes from one universe to the next down the chain, to us it feels like fluid motion and everything is making sense. I mean, there may be tiny glitches sometimes, but things should happen as they're supposed to, like a cosmic scale stop motion film. This model of reality does allow for time travel, whether it's someone coming in from externally, or rather the string of universes determining actually the most likely thing to happen would be that this person uses time travel and goes, let's say, backwards in time to change something. In either of those events, if a given universe is altered in a certain way, that won't just change the other universes down the chain, rather it will trigger the spawning of a separate chain of universes, a detour. And I say detour because, again, the Alpha Realm will try to get it to rejoin the original timeline as soon as possible. Some changes are irrecoverable. It'll be impossible to get back onto the same chain again. Too much has been altered too drastically. But again, if it can, it will try to make it as close as possible to the original. And the souls, as we flow through the universes, will henceforth go through this diversion instead of down the original path anymore. And as such, those previous universes that are no longer having souls going through them, they become dormant. They enter a state that we could call hypobeaureia. And that's just a state that I want you to keep a mental note of. Next, we'll talk about again the race called the Polanzias, who are our cosmos's enforcers of justice by their perceptions at least, and sorts of thing. They are always in the know of what the best thing to do is, and it's their place to make sure that everything is done right, more so even necessarily than the local people to whom the injustice might be more directly related. Well, at some time previous, when the entities, who are their own other species of creatures that would call themselves gods, when they were spending some time in the Andromeda Galaxy, I've done videos, I've already done the iCard, but that they spent some time in the Andromeda Galaxy, the Polanzias were there too, and so once they went their separate ways again, the Polanzias left with some gifts of more advanced technology from the entities. One example of this technology was that with which they could resize themselves or things. If you're looking at just across the multiverse, how things will have evolved and developed. Not everything is going to be on the exact same scale of existence. Some things will be bigger, some things will be smaller. And so the entities have this technology that allows them to make themselves, or namely their ships or their equipment, bigger or smaller to be appropriate. And so now the Polanzias had a version of that technology as well. As they thus went on to experiment on their own with this technology, there was one ship down the line developed which was to investigate the possibility of, could they use this technology to, in essence, duplicate themselves. What you had in this prototype ship was its larger frame in which the Polanthian crew would be inhabiting. You have the ring section kind of inside it, which is what the technology for resizing operates via. And then within the ring in turn, you have a perfect smaller version of the same larger ship. And the idea was they would try to have miniaturized versions of the crew in the smaller version of the ship in the middle, whilst still using the spatial distortions being formed, have them in the bigger version as well. Basically, by compounding the spatial distortions within a limited contained space, have them be in both versions of the ship at once. Basically, reality rejected this as soon as they tried to turn it on. And the way it rejected this, because otherwise it basically needs to split the beaureia energy into two simultaneous places, even if the crew members are then theoretically in the exact same positions on both versions of the ship. It doesn't know what to do with that, but the ship is trying to do it, and in theory it should work, so they basically just shunted that ship into the nearest dormant universe, one in a state of hypobeaureia. The problem is, because that universe doesn't have any soul energy flowing through it, the souls of the crew on that ship are now stuck there. They're not able to move between universes and thus experience motion. They don't have hexagons active either. It's all just stuck there in a single dead moment. They're basically the only souls in that universe, because all the other souls moved on and went down a new detour loop. Of course, then the Polanzias had to try to get that ship and its crew back, and thus we have the formation of a faction called Vemus. They would spearhead a project to build this, which is a large space station with the eventual function of scanning that dormant universe for where the ship might have gone to, because in order to try to bring them back, they need to know where they are to begin with. Such a complex thing to build would this be, though, that the Vemus employed various other aliens to build the different components for them. They basically gave them these very thin, stick-like ships that were meant to be built out upon, and they put, in theory, timers that couldn't be tampered with the idea that because these ships would ultimately be able to move through time using hexagon technology, basically to create pockets of different reality to the Alpha Realm and be able to move around it and outside of the flow of time. Again, stuff we've talked about before. But because these ships would be moving outside of the regular flow of time, they nevertheless want to make sure that these hired aliens aren't dilly-dallying and going off and doing other stuff. So when they do turn up, they'll be able to check the time to make sure, yes, you didn't waste time doing this, you built this stuff out as the specs required, and then immediately brought that all back to this one specific universe. Because the Polanzias don't want to lose track of where the ship went, they know it's going to be stuck in a single universe, they, with their own hexagon technology, went back to identify that exact universe where it happened, and now are existing inside their own perpetual hexagon states. So you have all these thin ships coming in and connecting to one another and these other larger bits here, until this eventually all builds up. Yes, not all of the people they employed, all the ships, did come back as required, so they had to hire out more, but for the most part, it worked out. Once we end up with the Eblo built, therefore, what this is essentially doing is one massive array to scan the other dormant universe. Each of these little bumps, or where the arms are connecting, is essentially a room or a section in which the crew of this structure can inhabit. These external lumps here are the actual arrays that are scanning and receiving. Meanwhile, in the centre, we have where the engine or the amplifier would go to make sure that, it has enough of a reach as it needs to. So, because this is all completely experimental, they don't know what's going to work best. What happened is when they have a potential new engine / amplifier, however you want to think about it, the station expands out, they move the thing into the centre, and then it closes in, seals around it, and then starts from the inner panels, or incorporating it as necessary to better fuel. Again, not fuel as we'll specify in a second, but boost all of the other equipment that's going on. It turbocharges it. And this all inspired by, as a kid, me with this, just liking how when you push it all in, it's like you've got a little planet, I would think about it, in there in the middle with these bits coming out of it, and you can split up the planet again and reform it, although here now it's more of a cage, as is technically more accurate because it is hollow inside. As I say, while we have the engine amplifier, wherever we want to think about it, in the middle, boosting everything, that is not, strictly speaking, where the fuel is coming from. How do you power this? Well, they could, if they wanted, bring in any other fuel sources that would be available, but to do rather two birds with one stone, they are powering themselves off the souls that would otherwise be going through into that dormant universe after the ship. Because again, in the Alpha Realm, there's not just one iteration of our souls. Through every single universe that there is another wave of souls coming after us. Every fraction of a nanosecond, you have these more and more souls passing through every single universe. So in that dormant one, you have the souls of the original crew there that now can't move on because there's no flow in the dormant universes, but then you've got the souls of the crew coming in from the next beaureia wave, and the one after that, and one after that. Perpetually, it's all building up inside now this one ship in this one static universe. And in theory, this would lead to... It's not a unique scenario to this. There are other versions of this happening that are then avoided because they're dangerous, but in theory you can have souls building up in what would otherwise usually be a natural buffer in the skin of reality. This usually occurring when people leave the Alpha Realm for the outer region or something like that. Either way, souls building up, and eventually, if it becomes too much, it overloads, and there would be a sizable release of energy, shall we say. So, by the Polanzias here in this station, basically finding where the souls are passing from the previous universe, where, in the instant previous, because remember they're also staying in one moment to keep track of the ship. In the previous moment, the soul was going to where the ship was, and then suddenly entering this universe, they're veering off to shoot into the dormant one. They're able to connect to that, and instead siphon off at least some of that soul energy to fuel themselves. So it gives them power, and also slows down the build-up of dangerous energy in that other universe. We've talked about the concept of using souls as a fuel source previously, again, video in the iCard. We've talked about the potential ethics of that there. But either way, that's what we have happening here. Now, just because, though, they have been able to identify the trail of souls as it is entering their active universe, that doesn't mean they can then just immediately follow that trail into the dormant universe and immediately pinpoint where the ship is. Because again, they still need to be scanning that dormant universe, which they need this to do, and they're still developing how to do that, to scan across realities. In turn, let's say there was an uncertainty in the direction of soul flow of a fraction of a degree. On the scale of a universe, just in 3 dimensions, a uncertainty of 1 degree, that is very quickly, nevertheless, going to create one massive cone that the soul trail might ultimately be going in, which creates... still cutting it down from scanning the entire universe, but nevertheless that's a lot of space that they would need to search to identify where exactly that ship has ended up. Scanning universes is more the foray of the Brethren Lords, who we meet in the first set of books. Again, that's their whole official function, being to study all of the Alpha Realm universes. They have been around for longer than us, and they still are not done scanning all the universes, even with their advanced technology, because the universes are just that big and each have that much detail to them to document. Even so, first of all, if that's how long it takes for the Brethren Lords to do it, the Polanzias definitely going to take a very long time to study that limited cone of space. But also you might think, well, why don't the Polanzias go to the Brethren Lords to ask for assistance? I mean, that might potentially be... we can quibble over whether the Brethren Lords would agree to help, but it may be smart to ask. But the Polanzias are of the mindset of this is an internal affair of theirs, they don't need to bother anyone else about it. They'll do this all on their own, plus with the other aliens they hired to help build it. But they're not doing the actual job itself. This task, therefore, they will be at for as long as it takes, because they're all within a single moment. It doesn't really matter to them. Once they are done, they can simply deactivate the hexagon field and re-enter the regular flow of time and go along with that. Although that in turn will generate more new universes because this structure wasn't in there previously, so that might end up with the universe finding a way to destroy the structure to bring us back to the previous version of events as soon as possible, wherein it didn't exist. But either way, for the moment, while it's in its hexagon outside of time, it can carry on doing its job as long as necessary. They, just being their own faction of Polanzias, completely disconnected from everything else that's going on. But as part of that, in just thinking about what might happen afterwards outside of this job of trying to find this ship, which again they're not going to give up on, rescuing their crew, but also to make sure that there is no soul overload eventually. It is also noted that with them scanning this other universe, the original universe or a previous version of the universe, before someone at some point changed events, because clearly that must have happened in order for there to be dormant universes. They're building up a picture of how this used to be, and so, again, they'd need to make equal scans of the active universe, but they, in theory, could start making comparisons. Again, not complete by any means, but if they wanted to give this structure a different job in the future, they could set it to, again, scanning the other dormant universes, scanning the universe it's currently in, checking for comparisons, and as it's going through the universes subsequently, or maybe not needing to go through every single universe sequentially, but it could make jumps between them, sizable gaps. They could use this to look out for when there are suddenly bigger differences, or when there are traces that yet more new universes have been spawned and there has been a detour. With that, they can identify when a time traveller might be interfering, and so then go to that, track it down, and make sure that there is nothing untoward going on. No one is taking liberties with reality that they shouldn't be. But that's all a theoretical project, as I say, for times not yet here. In theory, to help with that, they could build more of these to again position them throughout time, but it was such a hassle to get this together in the first place. So long as they could get away with just using this one, they would indeed just try to do that for efficiency's sake. Hopefully you have found that interesting. If you have, let me know first of all, and then secondly, there are plenty of other videos on the channel that you can check out as well, talking about other places in the universe, or multiverse, talking about other races in the multiverse, talking about the books, all sorts of things. There's various playlists you can check if you want to see anything specifically, or just scroll through, see what might catch your interest. Whatever you do, also just be sure to stick around for what's to come next in turn. Next week we are back to one of our final making a sequel videos after having a little hiatus with everything that happened with Game of Thrones stuff. But we'll get to that next week, and in the meantime, main thing is to just remember to keep on telling stories.